It's great to be back after our summer hiatus. For those who are new, I'd like to particularly to welcome you. I oftentimes like to introduce myself as a miracle of meditation and yoga. I was 5'6" before I started the practice. Here I am, a little over 6'5", so. I was actually 13 when I first learned meditation. And my experience back then was with transcendental meditation, which was quite popular. How many of us have learned TM at some point? Just curious. Yeah. TM is a beautiful technique, mantra meditation. And back when I learned it, it was sort of the McDonaldization of meditation, you know. It was, they had a beautiful, standardized way of teaching meditation. It was quite profound. But really, it shifted something. From the very moment I experienced it, I thought, this is something I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life, and indeed I have. So I thought I might share a little bit, kind of, as I mentioned, the title of this talk is 3 Reasons Why I Meditate. And the first one is that science tells me it's good for me. There are about 10,000 studies that have been done on the brain and how it relates to meditation. And it's fascinating material, really quite amazing. But I'd like to trace it back to how this experience of meditation has moved around the planet. I've shared this before, but so here's this experience that the Buddha has. You know, as a really profound teacher, obviously it's transforming people's lives. So along the trade routes, people are telling each other, wow, if you try this stuff, it really makes a difference. So this primary experience, as taught by the Buddha, moves around the planet. It goes down to Sri Lanka, it goes down into Vietnam and into the jungles, which are areas that are really isolated. So the form of practice in Sri Lanka and Vietnam and Burma are kind of the true orthodox practices. They're practicing pretty much exactly how the Buddha taught. And then as it went along trade routes going into China and to Tibet, the core teachings of Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist psychology sort of fused with the quality of the culture. So if you contrast the practice of meditation and the culture of meditation in Thailand with Tibet, it's just crazy different because it took on the animistic qualities of the Tibetan culture. So you've got the wrathful deities and all the colors and the horns, and how could that be Buddhism? And yet it is. It just gets fused into the culture. So it went to Japan, and it took on the whole Zen quality as they absorbed it into their culture. Went into Korea, it took on that kind of that fierce sort of Kensho Koan approach that's, you know, in the Korean tradition. And then it made its way into the West, into the United States. So we did what we do. We sliced it, we diced it, we measured it, we did double-blind studies, we did functional MRIs to see how this stuff really, really works. We ran it through our sort of scientific grid. And what's so interesting about it is when you look at the literature from a purely scientific standpoint, it's extraordinary. As I like to say, if meditation was a drug, it would be considered the miracle drug of this era. It's so profound. So here are just some of the studies. I looked these up on the internet, so they're true. This is new to me, but that they've noticed that people with a meditation practice have higher levels of gyrification. Gyrification is the folding of the cerebral cortex. And it's thought that this is tied into making the brain better at processing information, better at making decisions and forming memories and improving attention. So we actually see that it actually enhances the physical structure of the brain. There are other studies that show that there is cortical thickness of the brain, which has to do with your capacity to withstand pain. There's a 2009 study. The title is Long-Term Meditation is Associated with Increased Gray Matter Density in the Brainstem. Again, you can physically change your brain through this deceptively simple practice. It's linked to larger hippocampal and frontal volumes of gray matter, which results in more positive emotions and retention of emotional stability. It's proven to diminish age-related effects on gray matter and to reduce cognitive decline. Earlier this year, there was a study that said that meditators have a different expression of brain metabolites than healthy non-meditators. And this is linked directly to anxiety and depression. So more of a capacity to tolerate anxiety and depression. It's been linked to dramatic changes in electrical brain activity, namely increased theta and alpha EEG activity, which is associated with wakeful and relaxed attention. So your capacity to pay attention gets enhanced through practice. Another study that just came out that said that 20 minutes a day significantly reduces stress. So there's something about that 20 minutes. Also increased levels of empathy, which comes specifically from loving kindness meditation. I took part in a study with Harvard and Kripalu Center, where again, all these different research areas are taking different parts of the brain and exploring the effect. And this particular study I took part in was they're exploring a thickening of the left side of the prefrontal cortex, which has to do with facial recognition. And part of the theory was that your capacity to recognize a face is also tied into your capacity to sense what another person is feeling. So it's kind of predicated on if you are more self-aware, then you are naturally more aware of others. And there's part of the prefrontal cortex which is associated with who you are as a separate person and who you are as one who can connect with others. Really fascinating stuff. It was an amazing study to take part in because I was doing a functional MRI, which was a trip unto itself. I'd never done one before. But I was lying on my back. I was wearing glasses that had mirrors on them, looking into a monitor over my head. And I had a mouse in one hand and a squeeze bulb in the other in case I freaked out, and tubes up my nose, doing these facial recognition experiences. Perhaps you can sense how these studies feel like they would have that effect. Again, this practice is so simple. It's about training yourself to shift from the cognitive to the experiential. Learning how to shift from thinking and all that's associated with that back to the here and now. Whenever you become aware of a thought, whenever you become aware that you're experiencing an emotion, in that moment of recognition, it's like you're severing your identification with it. Or as we used to say in transcendental meditation, like every time you become aware of a thought or emotion or a belief, it's like you're releasing a little bubble of stress. And you're reinforcing who you are as the observer and who you are as awareness itself. What I find so cool about all the research that's going on is that the result of all this research is a deeper and deeper level of acceptance in our culture. The Marine Corps now is teaching meditation. You may be familiar with Congressman Tim Ryan, who just wrote a book called A Mindful Nation, who really sees this practice of mindfulness as something that can transform our entire culture. I've had the honor of sharing the dais with him a couple of times. And he really has a beautiful way of putting it. He's from the Midwest. He's from Ohio. And he says, I have gone so much further out on a limb with a lot less evidence than what's here. If you look at the evidence, the effect of meditation on young people, their brains, their capacity to concentrate, their capacity to build resilience toward anxiety and depression, it's extraordinary. And as he says, if it's good enough for the Marines, it's good enough for my children. So he has a vision, actually, in the process of trying to create a very large foundation to begin to support taking this into education. The possibility, if you could imagine, every VISTA volunteer in the country being trained to teach meditation and take this to kids who don't have access to it now. Very exciting stuff. And for myself, who sort of stumbled into the practice at 15, it had a profound effect for me of giving me more of a sense of resilience, a sense of creativity, and so forth. So the science is really infusing our culture in a really powerful way. I shared here before, but how in the past when I first moved down to D.C., we'd have workmen, at the house, and they'd say, "So, well, what do you do for a living?" And I would always say something like, "Stress management." But now I just say I teach meditation. And I'm just amazed at how many people say, my wife's been on me to learn meditation. I had one fellow who, he was a vet who was doing some work on the house, who shared with me a lot of the stress that he had. And so I gave him one of my CDs, and I see him every now and then. And it's just so cool to really see how much science has made it possible for our culture to open to this. So the second reason why I meditate is a lot of timeless teachings say it's good for me also. When you look at the Christian tradition, the kingdom of heaven is found within. Wow. I was raised a Quaker. So there was a lot of talk of the still small voice within and all that stuff, but it wasn't until I learned meditation that I recognized there's actually a technology for going in. There's a technology that can, with practice, help you become more and more facile at recognizing when you're lost in the world of thought forms and when you are actually present. In the Muslim tradition, there's just a quote I ran across that says that meditation is one of the most important aspects of a successful Islamic lifestyle. When we consciously adopt Islam for ourselves, we do so through recognition and cognizance of the oneness of God. We contemplate and recognize Allah is worthy of worship. We recognize truth in His words and in the guides He sent for us to our benefit. None of this is possible without contemplation, reflection, concentration, observation, and presence of mind. In that same way, in the tradition of Judaism, meditation was an integral part from the very beginning. When you look at the early scripture, there are references to the patriarch of Isaac who would go out for his meditation practice. And so, of course, in Buddhism, we have the roots of meditation. In Buddhism itself, and also what we're calling now sort of secular meditation, where we sort of take the principles of meditation and sort of strip out all of anything that might be deemed as religious. If you look at mindfulness-based stress reduction and all of those traditions, they have made powerful inroads into the healthcare community and so forth, because it's all science-based. It's all evidence-supported practice. So either way, when you look at the roots of Buddhist practice, we have the story of the Buddha, who was committed to looking deeply into the nature of reality, to really discern what are the essential truths of the human experience that cannot be simplified any further. There are lots of lists in the Buddhist tradition, the Four Noble Truths, the Five Hindrances, the Seven Factors of Awakening, and on and on and on. But the most powerful list, which is really the core of the practice, is the recognition of the four essential insights the Buddha had upon his awakening. His recognition that these truths are true for all beings. The first is the truth of suffering. The second is the cause of suffering. The third is the cessation of suffering. And the fourth is the path that leads to the end of suffering. So the first noble truth is a recognition that when you come into form, stress, unsatisfactoriness, and suffering are part of the human experience. It just comes with a package. You get one of these portable flesh units. Stress, suffering, dissatisfaction, unsteadiness is just part of the deal. There's something quite profound in recognizing that this is what happens. The second insight, that there is a cause for that suffering, can be quite a revelation. In the Buddha's discovery, he discerned that the cause of stress, unsatisfactoriness, unsteadiness has something to do with attachment, has something to do with clinging, has something to do with identification. That's a very helpful thing to remember for myself. When I have any complaint, there's usually something I'm hanging on to, something I'm defending, something I can't let go of. The third essential insight from the Buddha is that it's possible to let go. It's possible to let go of attachment, of clinging, and identification. And of course, we all intuitively know this because we've all done it before. As the saying goes, if you let go a little bit, you'll have a little bit of space, a little bit of freedom. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of space and a lot of freedom. So this recognition that anything you are identified with, it's possible to let go. The fourth insight is that there is a path that leads to the end of stress, unsatisfactoriness, unsteadiness, and suffering. That there are technologies, there are observances, there are restraints, there are certain ways that we can live our life more and more skillfully, where we can minimize the stress and maximize our capacity for joy, for happiness, for compassion and kindness. So we could spend this whole next year exploring these four basic truths, and in fact, we will in different ways. Someone said, every Dharma talk is pretty much the same Dharma talk, if you haven't noticed. So remembering this, when I remember, which is not all that often, can be tremendously helpful. When I find myself stuck, to recognize this is part of the human experience. To ask myself, what am I holding on to? How am I contributing to this sense of stress or suffering? And when I can see it, to ask myself, can I let this go? Is it possible to shift my identity in some way? And when I can do that, to whatever degree I can do that, I've shifted from staying caught and experiencing a sense of freedom. There's another list which I have found tremendously helpful in my practice. And I think as we sort of start off the fall, it's helpful to sort of name this, because again, it's a very powerful way to sort of deconstruct our experience. The Buddha said if you really look at the moment-to-moment experience of your life, you might notice three essential characteristics. course, I always like to preface this by saying one of the things I so appreciate about the exploration of Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy is how the Buddha said repeatedly, don't believe a word of what I'm telling you. You have to find this out for yourself. But he said you may notice three characteristics, three marks of reality. The first one is called anicca, or impermanence. You'll notice that everything is changing. Everything is changing. Everything is constantly becoming something else. The second characteristic of reality is referred to as dukkha. And dukkha is, the rough translation is sort of suffering, stress, unsatisfactoriness. And the degree that you feel stress in your life is the degree to which you are resisting that change. If something isn't changing and you want it to, or something is changing and you don't want it to the degree you are resisting that, you will experience stress and suffering. As the third Zen patriarch put it so beautifully, life is not difficult for those who have no preferences. The third characteristic of reality is the principle of what can be referred to as not self. That there is a relative self, that who you are is the product of causes and conditions. Your family, your culture, your parents, all these causes and conditions have sort of formulated a character structure by which you're navigating through your life. But ultimately, who are you in the absence of those causes and conditions? And that's a whole category to explore. But what I've noticed for myself, just to put it as simply as I can, is usually the best times of my life were when I wasn't really there. It was just sort of happening. I mean, I was present, but I wasn't trying to control it. I was sort of in a flow state. So no matter what your religious background or your cultural background, chances are that you've thought about the nature of reality from time to time. Oftentimes when we are more involved in that inquiry are the times when we're suffering the most. Usually the experience of sickness, of old age, of death, a very powerful way of sort of waking us up to something that is beyond just this life of form. Out of our suffering, our search begins. Just the desire to know what is true. What do I know to be true? This is a great yogi who said that the greatest wonder in the world is that everyone dies. And the second greatest wonder in the world is that no one thinks they will. We so easily get caught into thinking that this world is permanent, that we are here forever. It's when we begin to wake up to the reality of constant, never-ending change. The fact that your body will drop away, that everyone you know, everyone you love will disappear at some point. That we can begin to really turn our attention to investigate what's true. So all great traditions talk about the importance of pausing, paying attention, of looking at reality, whether that's dwelling on the presence of the teachings of Christ or Muhammad or Buddha. But ultimately, though, the only way that you can corroborate what's true is through your own inner experience. And that kind of leads me to the third reason why I meditate. And that is that my experience tells me it's good for me. Externally, there's science. There are those who've walked before me, but ultimately, it's my own experience that corroborates this. I mentioned earlier I was raised a Quaker, and there's a lot of language given to the still small voice within, the whole idea that there's sort of like a resonant truth, and if you can just sort of relax and sort of allow it to come forward, there's a real beauty in that. It was confusing for me. Remember in my early, I think from like 10 to maybe 13, the Vietnam War was raging. And there were a lot of really angry Quakers, who were just sort of blasting off in Quaker meeting. I thought, is this the still small voice within? I couldn't figure it out, When I had the experience in meditation, it was really just a few moments of feeling a deep stillness inside. There was a recognition that there are tools, that there are attentional strategies that can help you and help me to make this shift. For me, when I began meditation as an incredibly awkward, gawky 15-year-old, to have a sanctuary, to have a refuge that I could go to as a way to sort of calm, as a way to deeply rest inside, I found that basic axiom, the more profound your rest, the more profound your activity, was true for me. Taking time to stop and pause. When I re-emerged, I was refreshed on a level that was much more than just physical rest. So there's a statement that says that enlightenment is an accident, and meditation makes you accident-prone. One thing I noticed pretty quickly in my own practice of meditation was it was very, very hard to do by myself. Very hard to discipline myself, to stop and slow down. Maybe you've noticed this for yourself. We know it's good for us, and yet to really build that in and make it a priority is quite a challenge. So when I learned meditation, I lived in a boarding school, and there were enough other people who were also interested that we were able to create a little collective. And we got the keys to the library before dinner, and we'd meditate together. Having that little collection, that little collective, made all the difference. It kept my practice alive. There was conversation around the practice that was really enlivening. So I meditated all through high school. I kind of went to college and kind of felt a little bit lost, for the first year or so. And I sort of had this fantasy of finding a community of meditators. I grew up on a farm and worked a lot on farms. And by the grace of something, I stumbled into a community of meditators. And we also ran a big farm. So all through college, I co-managed a 1,000-acre farm. I was the livestock manager of 500 hogs, believe it or not. But we all meditated together. So when we would do spring plowing, we'd all stop and jump in a pickup truck and drive to the corner of the field and meditate and go back to our tractors. And again, something about the community kept my practice really alive. After college and grad school, I joined the Peace Corps. And I was really excited to sort of continue my practice. And there were 75 of us in our training. I thought, this is going to be great. So I stood up and I said to the group, I'm really into meditation, and everyone who wants to join me, let's meet over in the corner. One guy. What I discovered was that one guy was all I needed. He lived way out in the bush. I lived in the city. Whenever he came into town, we'd practice. We shared our inspiration around the practice. And I realized for myself that I needed community to support me in my practice. When I came back, I stumbled into an intentional community and lived in a yoga ashram for 20 years. And again, having the sense of community was very, very important for me. And over the years of being kind of immersed into the world of yoga and meditation, I've had the opportunity to study with lots of different teachers and lots of different traditions. And I've really come to see that the technique of meditation is really secondary to the result. Whatever meditation technique you learn, whatever tradition in which you learn meditation, I can pretty much guarantee you, you can find another tradition that will tell you exactly the opposite instructions. Meditate with the eyes open. Meditate with the eyes closed. Meditate with your palms facing up. No, no, no. Meditate with your palms facing down. Focus on the breath of the nostrils. No, 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 no. Focus on the breath of the belly. No, no, no. You should scan through the body. On and on and on. There are many, 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 many techniques. It's been said there are, I think, 186,000 Dharma gates. 86,000 ways to access presence. It's helped me a lot. I think at different times I found myself to be a bit of a fundamentalist around practice because I found a technique that really worked for me, and it can be very helpful to stick with one technique. There are those who say that when it comes to the practice of meditation or any attentional strategy, you may have heard this, some people say if you want water, you dig one well. Stay with one technique and drill deep. There are others who say, actually, with all the different techniques that are available, it's really important that you find the techniques that really work for you, to find the techniques that resonate with your personality. Some of us are more devotional. Devotional practices might really work for you. Some of us are much more physical. Doing a physical practice, a form of yoga, might really be what really cuts it for you. Some of us are more around action, and the path of service is a profound path. Others of us are more intellectual, and the path of jnana yoga, of intellect, of reading, really kind of blowing the mind. There's certain techniques that are very powerful to focus your mind in a way that actually blows your mind. So, as you explore meditation in your life, I think it's helpful to be aware of different techniques and how they can be very skillful techniques at different times. For me, the purpose of meditation, and this is just words, it's about accessing presence. It's about coming into a sense of being. So if a technique can take me to that sense of being present in the here and now, that technique has worked. There's a classic teaching story that the Buddha talked about of how if you're crossing a river, you're using a raft. When you get to the other side of the river, you don't have to carry the raft with you and leave the raft behind. So as you explore the different techniques and what resonates for you, it's very important to practice one particular instruction I found from the Buddha to be very, very helpful. With all the different techniques that are out there, your task is to give yourself to it fully and then ruthlessly evaluate, did this observance, did this technique result in a more wholesome state or in a less wholesome state? The only one who can really discern what works for you is you. So we'll be exploring a lot of different techniques, different approaches, different ways of slicing and dicing this practice, but ultimately, for me, it really comes down to cultivating a sense of presence. Our time has flown by so fast. I thought we might just do a short little meditation and then just a few comments, and we'll have a few announcements. So with your eyes closed, you might draw your attention into the sense of here and now in the senses. You might focus on wherever you feel the breath the most predominant. You might draw your awareness to the sounds around you. You might draw your attention to the aliveness in the palms and fingers and thumbs. And you might reflect on these three qualities, these three marks of reality, of constant change. As you feel the sense doors wide open, notice everything that is shifting and changing and flowing and moving. And you might sense in here the recognition that anything you resist, anything you hold onto in this realm of change, will result in some form of unsteadiness, some form of subtle or not so subtle stress. And you might sense who you are as the observer. In these few moments, your capacity to let it be, to let it flow. We'll close with these words from the poet Dana Falls. It only takes a reminder to breathe, a moment to be still. And just like that, something in me settles, softens, makes space for imperfection. The harsh voice of judgment drops to a whisper, and I remember again that life is not a relay race, that we will all cross the finish line, that waking up to life is what we were born for. As many times as I forget, catch myself charging forward without even knowing where I'm going, that many times I can make the choice to stop, to breathe and be, and walk slowly into the mystery. And gently deepening your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes.